Hey, Chad Peterman here, your host of the Can't Stop the Growth podcast, a show that advances the home services industry and beyond. For today's episode, I'm about to pass the mic to our partners at smartac.com for their special monthly series on all things innovation and business. Together, we bring content that empowers you to build a positive, healthy workplace for you, your people, and your bottom line. So let me officially pass the mic to smartac.com for today's episode, chock full of insights that you can take and apply to your growth. Now listen and grow.
Hello, and welcome to Experience Matters, the monthly series created by and for entrepreneurs and leaders, specifically in the home services industry. Whether you're navigating the integration of cutting-edge technology, expanding your team, or aiming to elevate your brand experience, we've got you covered. Each month, we'll bring practical solutions, innovative concepts, and insider knowledge to fuel the growth of your business. Along the way, we'll feature several industry leaders to share their knowledge and insights. We appreciate you being here. Let's get started. Hey listeners, just a quick note. Today's episode is part of a special two-part series about the entrepreneurial roller coaster. So make sure to tune into both episodes for the full story. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Experience Matters podcast. We're fortunate enough to be part of the Can't Stop the Growth series with Chad Peterman. My name is Andy Fuselier, and this is Josh Teekell, and we are your hosts. And our Experience Matters podcast, we'll be using our unique backgrounds in entrepreneurship, leadership, and innovation to bring you all sorts of fun stories, interviews, facts, features on topics we think you'll find useful and entertaining. Today, we're calling this episode the Entrepreneurial Roller Coaster. We'll be covering a variety of topics that I'm sure will resonate with a lot of you out there. Opening a business is absolutely a roller coaster. The main difference is in you get on a ride at a theme park, you can expect to get off unharmed, and the vast majority of people do. That's not the case when starting or joining a new business. In fact, the facts support that with 20% of businesses fail in the first year, 50 in the first 5 years. And in the startup world, which we kind of sit in with smartac.com, only about 4% of companies ever make it to $1 million in revenue, and less than 0.4 make it to 10 million. So those statistics sound terrifying, but people still make the leap every day. And many actually go on to find success. And that's certainly true of our special guest today, Landon Brewer, who has an extensive experience building various organizations through the years and is now successfully building his own small empire of companies. So excited to have him on today. And we're going to jump in here a lot more of his stories, all of our stories. So let's get started and dig into the entrepreneurial roller coaster. So all of us here have our own journeys. It's all over the map. But first off, let's just start with Landon. Thanks so much for joining us on the show. We really appreciate having you here.
Hey man, it's good to see you guys. It's been a little while. I think Josh was just saying we need to get together again, but I was just hearkening back to the last time I was hanging out with Andy, I think after some whiskey in the car and singing Boys to Men. I don't know if I want to repeat that.
Yeah, I barely remember that now, but now I suddenly very vividly remember it. I mean, look, when we do stuff like that, you just quickly fall into a groove with people who have been there before. You know, it's those all the shared experiences. My friends and I call it founders therapy, right? Where there's only certain people who understand what you go through and the stresses, the ups and downs of the business, you know. And so when you get together with people like that and let loose, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, you know, I've had kind of a myriad of experiences, right, on the entrepreneurial stage. I've also been on the other side of it, where I've worked for companies and been an employee like most people. And my thought process on it is because for a while I was like, man, you want to avoid I'm a relatively risk averse person, which for somebody that's in business is kind of a weird thing, right? And so for my initial, as I was like mapping out my life when I'm going to school and going to college and grabs like, okay, I've got this, I'm going to go this accounting route. I'm going to make these moves. Maybe I'm going to get into some tech and get some sweat equity and become, a .com billionaire, charting that out with as little risk as possible. And what you don't realize is that whether you're an employee, whether you're an owner, whether you're an entrepreneur or not, there's always risk, right? There's a risk with everything in life. There's career risk. In my perspective, in my view, if you aren't in a position to kind of control your own destiny, even if it's working for somebody, even if you're a senior executive in an organization and you're kind of calling the shots and operating the business, you can kind of to some degree control your own destiny. And so if you're going to take the risk, whether being an employee, working for somebody, an investor, my perspective is always be on a side that can at least operationally kind of control that level of risk. You have your hand in your success. I've worked for organizations that have been very successful and others that haven't been that successful. And when I wasn't a part of like a key integral part of making that happen, I felt a little bit unfulfilled, but more importantly, I'm not controlling what happens to me, right? So I think entrepreneurship is really the ultimate in, I'm going to take risk anyways. Why not put myself in a position to control it to some degree?
And I love that. That falls into my exact mantra through the years. So I've got, 20-ish years or so of companies. And the things that I always did before I went into anything, whether I was recruited in to be a part of a team or I was kind of helping start it from early stage, I kind of had the same thing. Does it check these boxes? Number one, am I enjoying it? Number two, am I learning? Number three, do I like the people around me? And then number four, didn't develop for me personally over time because I didn't realize it, but it's exactly what you said. Do I have some sense of control over the outcome of this thing? Because I was a part of things early when I didn't, and it went sideways. And I thought, man, if I'm ever in charge, I will make different choices. I will ask different questions, because if you avoid the risk aspect of it, and you're not a part of it, then you feel helpless. So I think that's a huge point.
Thank you, Josh.
Yeah, Josh wants to jump in.
Andy said we were talking about entrepreneurship today, so I started drinking beforehand. I think, you're able to, even if you're in a company that you don't own or you didn't start, there are good managers will give employees the opportunity to take risks, fail, succeed, learn how to, manage a product or a branch of a business, own that, that P&L. And I think you can really get a lot of the experience that you need in order to start a business before taking all of that risk, right? You can play with house money, if you will. It's amazing how many, companies even started, obviously the planning stages, but even started the businesses while they hadn't taken that full risk. I started my first company after hours while I was still, making money in the energy sector. So I do think that in general, there's ways to mitigate that risk, but at the end of the day, you do have to take the leap. And like you said, Landon, it's a risk reward type situation. If you're going to, bust your tail working, you may as well put yourself in a position where you have a piece of the pie. At a tech startup, that's kind of everybody has a piece of the pie. And in contracting, if you have a partner or if you start the business, you can, spread out that upside.
Well, I got a question for you because you've been on both sides of what you just said. You got the tech startup and you got the contracting. What's better?
I think being a contractor is easier than starting a tech company, no doubt. But, the upside's probably not the same. So it's just a risk reward situation. I think when you start a tech company, Andy had the stats, but the great majority do not make money, right? They never become profitable. They never get to an exit. They never reach product market fit. They never scale versus, I'm sure the numbers aren't great with contractors, but if you work at a contracting company for 5-10 years and you understand most of the way it operates, you should be able to have success. In my case, my dad had been a contractor for 3 decades and taught me a lot of, in 6 months, taught me 25 years of hard knocks. But certainly you got to do your homework ahead of time and understand, but just very different businesses. A contractor should be profitable from day one. A tech company that's going to scale quickly is almost certainly not. And so it's weird, we make decisions at a tech startup that are looking what we're going to be 2, 3, 4 years in advance. And you should do that as a contractor as well, but you really have to be profitable from day one because most of these businesses aren't taking on, capital every 6, 12 months to keep growing. So just extremely different type situations.
Yeah, one's kind of a measure of cash flow. The other one's a measure of cash burn for a while, right?
Yeah, for a period at least, yes. But I think it really comes down to product market fit. I had the opportunity of launching a product in the home improvement space that it was very clear we had product market fit. It was a new product in a market that had never seen it before. And we hit the ground running really before I even quit my job. And I was making more money after hours than I was, during my 40-hour work week. So I think that was a privilege to have that kind of hit the ground running day one. But I think in general, you have to, if you go start a business, especially as a contractor, I mean, you've got overhead, even if it's just you to start with, you got bills you got to pay, and you have to understand what does the stage of my business look like in the first 3 to 6 months to where I can pay my bills and make sure I take care of my family. And then when do I start leaning into investing back into growth?
That's a good segue, Josh, into the kind of the macro topics I wanted to cover today, so that kind of break it down. There's 1,000 things we could literally talk about, but I think the stages of a business, kind of stage one being surviving, deciding I'm going to do this, and you start it up, and then you are just literally every day figuring out, how do I make it to the next day, the next week or month? And then from there, it goes into what I call adapting, where you're no longer worried about, am I going to stay alive? It's now, how do I improve this machine, right? How do I get better? And a lot of that in, I think, the contracting and the trades world is filling knowledge gap that you didn't have or learn as a technician that you need as a business owner. And then the last being thriving. And so, Landon, specifically, I want to dig into your background and some of those teams that you were on, 10, 15 years ago, whatever. Like, how do you view those years, those teams, and then, you personally kind of going through that progression?
Yeah, I think because again, my background is more on the contracting side. I had probably a more unique experience than almost anybody that is an entrepreneur in our space, right? Most of them have a mechanical background. They have a trades background. I can't put office furniture together, right? I have no mechanical aptitude whatsoever. And I got into this. I was a financial analyst that was working took a job I found a newspaper in Missouri, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and found a confidential company request interview for financial analysts, and it was the guys that took Service Experts public. And I'm like, I love their plan. And so I was like, this sounds like the ideal strategy to take a business public and consolidate an industry, and I want to be a part of it. So I had a more accounting and finance background, and most people don't have the benefit of that, right? So I came in, and my job was to be the systems processes guy, to write the books, to define the best practices, to put the company financial models together, to figure out what the average tickets need to be, to figure just kind of like that elevation of a business. I didn't just come in and set up a contracting business. So I had a little bit of a more unique background than most people in the contracting space. But when I came in, I was very I had these perceptions of what business should be like coming from business school and all that. And, I'd wear we had a pretty strict uniform. We'd wear suits and ties and stuff like that. And I remember very distinctly one of my early mentors, a guy named Lon Castle. I don't know if you know him. He's still around the industry. And he was sitting in the desk behind me, and I was reviewing some contractors' financials. And I'm going over, your current ratio is this, it should be this, and, all these different financial ratios and more analytics. And I get off the phone, and Lon taps me on the shoulder and is like, hey, that guy on the other end of the call didn't have any idea what the hell you were talking about. I'm like, well, how do you know? You weren't on the call? He goes, because I was sitting behind you and I didn't understand what the hell you were saying, and I'm smarter than 95% of the people you're going to talk to. He said, so here's my recommendation. Keep it third grade, right? And so that was a valuable piece of advice that I took from him, taking all of this, okay, I should be this, a little Poindexter-ish, accounting guru guy that's going to add this value to people's lives. And I'm like, okay, well, you just got to be an everyday person. You got to be a relatable person. You have to speak to people on their level. You have to, and so as I got into it, and I quickly discovered, like, you can't show up to an office in, a suit and a tie. And so I adapted my dress code over time. And I remember I was a manager at ARS with Social Business ARS, and I was a manager there. And I started wearing jeans and more professional-ish casual attire. And I'm in the break room, and one of the call center ladies comes up to me. She goes, "I really like you." I said, "Well, thank you. I like you too." And she said, "Can I tell you something? Honestly, nobody liked you when you first came here." I'm like, "Why?" "The way you dressed and the way you." I'm like, "Really?" Because the way I dressed. So, there was a lot of learning. Like, you hear this like big chasm between like private equity in our space and then the operators. And I see it firsthand. I'm like, when I'm talking to these people, I'm like, hey, if you're going to do a deal with this person, don't show up looking like that. Put the jeans on, go show up like this. Don't bring them to your office.
When you were doing that work, and like meeting with a lot of these guys, like, what was the state like of a lot of these different businesses, right? When you showed up, I mean, because you started, I mean, I'm not saying you're old, but when you first started doing this, being younger, right? Things like Service Titan weren't the norm across the board. So, what you're just digging through spreadsheets? You trying to find numbers everywhere you can get them, or bank statements, or?
So at the time, the company I worked for, we owned Successware, which was kind of the CRM of the day. It was the leading edge CRM, and talk about catastrophic failure, of an entrepreneurial organization. They had the world by, the oysters, and they should have been 10x farther and way beyond Service Titan, because they had like a 10-year advantage. They had the entire industry, and they just didn't invest in the software. It wasn't an important thing. It was just like and then it was too late, right? And everybody else ate their lunch. They are a good example of somebody that went to surviving, adapting, and just stuck there and didn't continue to evolve. And I see that a lot in a lot of contracting businesses where, like you said, when I start working with a lot of people, most of them have, had a couple of years in business. They haven't built a tremendous amount of enterprise value for their business. And, they've seen that these businesses can be valuable and they can be very profitable and they can produce a lot of cash, and they're just not getting there. They understand the work. They understand, the basics of customer acquisition. They understand how to take care of the customer, some basic service fundamentals, but they're typically not experts in the financials, accounting, KPIs, basic managerial skills and accountability, and how to put those processes in place into the business. So most of them are on that like in between surviving and adapting stage, I'd say. They know that there's more, they want it, they just don't understand how to do it because,
sure.
If you're in a business, if you've had a business for 5 years and it's doing $3 million consistently, you got a $3 million company. And typically the people at the top, whether it's the owner, whoever the operator is, they're capped at 3 million. I would say another unique thing about how I came in with this structure going into that company called Venvest, which became Clockwork Home Services. The vision was to have $1 billion home services company across the country in all these locations. And so my mindset going in just from the initial interview was like, okay, these things are $1 billion. They should be $1 billion. And I came to find out that most people aren't doing $1 million and are not doing, 5 million. So it was very eye-opening, but I've kept that this entire time. Like if I'm going to wake up, I'm going to build a business that's worth at least $1 billion at this point. If I'm going to go to work and actually put any effort at all into it, it's got to be that, and that's my mindset. I realize that other people have a mindset of like, wow, if I could get an exit and make $4 million, it's life-changing money. And I agree, but why play for that? You always got to play higher. And I think that's where a lot of people get stuck, because a lot of people were, like you said, technicians coming in, they're maybe making maybe making 100 grand are like, well, I could make 400 grand if I just did a little bit more work and hired some people and made some money off of those people. And it's like, okay, well, that's not building a business. That's trying to make a little more money, which I appreciate the hustle and everybody does. But like, if you're going to build a serious, high enterprise value, high fidelity business, it takes a lot of skills. And, that adapting, putting in those best practices, joining all the best practices organizations, going online, getting all the information you need, hiring people that have the strengths that you need to help elevate your business. That's kind of the adapting stage. And then, that last stage that you mentioned, I would say very few, a small percentage of companies that I encounter get into the thriving stage, which is, hey, we've survived, we've got some tenure, we've adapted, we continuously evolve our model, we're looking at what's happening, we're getting more, we were the first at Ghetto, we were one of the first people in the country to put Service Titan in. We created something that Ken and I called call by call, right? Because we had, certain challenges that we had to reinvent the business every year. And we did that to the degree that, something that created almost $500 million in enterprise value over an 8-year period. So I'd say very few people come in with that goal in mind. And most of them come in with like, how can I make a little bit more money? And I think that's the difference.
What do you think, Landon, is the most common theme or character trait or, personality trait or with a company that makes it at scale? Like, you're obviously working with a lot of entrepreneurs that are contractors. What is it? Obviously, you work with Ken Goodrich a lot, and he's just a force of nature, of course. But what would you say if you could pick one or two things where in the first meeting you're like, that person has X and Y, and X and Y are the things that usually determine whether or not this entrepreneur?
The generic term leadership, meaning you have the ability to take something and push it across the finish line, right? Like, you have the ability to whether it's motivate people, hold them accountable, like just be that force of nature you're talking about, to like, you make a decision, it's going to happen in the company throughout the organization. And it's, you're going to do that, right? I think that's that one element. And then the second element, I would say, I don't know how you classify it, but like openness, meaning, it's easy to say, hey, we made $2 million last year. We're going to try and make $2.2 million this next year. It's more difficult to say, what if we just reinvented our business and could we make $5 million? Look at all the things that are broken. And what if we maximize and then having surrounding yourself with smart people and being willing to listen to the smart people and say, hey, this isn't my idea. That's a great idea. That's a great idea. Let's take this. Let's build a plan and do this. So the openness to other ideas and the ability to push those ideas across the finish line. I say those are probably the two top traits. You
can't be complacent, right? I mean, a lot of people get to a certain stage and really how far they go is a function of where they want to be, right? If you're running I know people that are running a $5 million shop and they are just ecstatic and they've already hit everything they ever dreamed and then some. And then of course we know people that are running $100 million organizations and they're, Tommy Miller comes to mind, something like that, where it's like, hey, you've already had this massive event and you have a massive organization, but you're trying to 3X in 3 years, right? It really does come down to,
Well, you mentioned Tommy, and there's a couple other people out there that, we've seen have some, stratospheric rise. I've worked with some people that have been those key sales driver people that can take businesses and go from 0 to 20 million and have these parabolic kind of rides. And I would say that the one other aspect that I've noticed about those, because I don't think I'm that person, because I'm the person that's like, okay, I think we can hit 7 million year one, and here's how we're tactically going to do it, right? And if we fall short, here's where we're going to fall short, and this is what the budget should be. And these other people are like, I'm going to be a billionaire. We're going to do this, and it takes almost you almost have to be missing something.
Delusional. That's what I was thinking. Slightly delusional.
You have to be slightly delusional because everybody else, it's not practical. It's almost a zero level of possibility, but you have to have the belief that you're going to be able to do it to some extent. And everybody else could be saying that guy's crazy. And now 9.5 times out of 10, those people are crazy and it never happens, right? But it's that small percentage of people that go parabolic, right?
Well, Landon, I think you mentioned a couple good things. I'm summarizing, or I've got notes and I'll summarize at the end because you got some great gems you dropped already. But when you talk about being a leader, and especially right now, talking about being a visionary leader, understanding where your personal strengths are. And yes, you can stand up and say $1 billion, $1 billion, $1 billion, but to be able to turn around and say, now I'm not going to make it happen if I don't have these 2-3 people around me, and I'm going to put them on the team, because you need a Landon who's going to step in and say, this is what the tactical plan is to get there. Or you need your expert marketing guy. It's like, I don't know if we're going to be able to do it, but here's what we're going to do to try and create the need for it to drive to $1 billion. I mean, no individual does it, right? And I think that is a huge, huge key here when we're talking about entrepreneur. You may be the person with the idea. You may have founded the company. You may have started it, and you may have taken it to that some certain level, but you cannot do it on your own. I don't know of anybody. So, I mean, on that regard, you, for us, right? You played a huge role early on in filling a knowledge gap we had about the industry. Josh comes with all sorts of experience in-home sales and customer psychology and all that. I have built various businesses prior to this, but had no experience in the trades. And so we knew we had something, but we came in and we needed people who were willing to spend time with us. And that was you. You offered your time as a mentor to us to say, guys, you don't know shit about what these people think about every day. And yes, you have a good idea, but if it's going to mean anything, it's going to be this. And so you were a huge piece of that, and us being like, look, tell us, fill our heads. How do we do this, right? And we've been super fortunate to have a number of people like that provided that mentor role. And so I will stress that heavily as whoever you are out there building a business. Surround yourself with people that are willing to share what they know, because it has absolutely been invaluable for us. I know, I know, Landon, you're probably the same way. You've got a number of mentors through the years that have done a lot of that.
Yeah, I mean that's the openness that I'm talking about. It's just the realization that you don't have all the answers, and there's other ways of looking at things. And most people, I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs don't have that. They kind of get stuck like, this is my vision, this is what I want to see happen, and which is great, and you can get to a certain point, but you got to be pretty remarkable visionary to drive it to these crazy places.
Well, even if you think you are going to disrupt whatever industry you're in, at a minimum, you have to understand, where is that industry today, right? What's the knowledge that people are bringing to the table when we interact with them the first time? And incremental change is still, it's easier to disrupt an industry with 3 or 4 incremental changes over 3 years than a wholesale change day one to every single thing they're doing, right? And that's a lot of what we do. We have like a 3, 4, 5 year roadmap of the things that we want to accomplish in the industry and how we think we can impact the contractor's ability to make money. But it wasn't like, hey, here's 5 things you need to change, do them all at once, right? It's like, hey, right now let's do this because this KPI gets better, and then once we accomplish that, now we have this new thing and it'll help you in this area. But it's obviously knowing your customer is a huge part of any success. Whether if you're a contractor selling in the home, you need to understand the customer psychology, and you need to have some contractors come out to your house, understand the way you view them in the first 5 minutes and the first 30 minutes, and what you would want to buy from at a minimum, or the type of person you would want to buy from. But yeah, knowing the customer journey, whether you're selling B2B or you're selling B2C, is and the psychology of what they're bringing in is really important. So
it's huge. And then I would say the next thing would be like how to measure that, right? How to measure your results, because you can try different things, you can tweak different things, but if you don't have a mechanism to measure how effective it is, well, what's the point? It's just, an idea in your head at that point. So having, good data, having measurable data that you can take action on, I think is another thing that most companies really lack in. Even with the advent in the contracting industry of all the new CRMs and the data sources that are available, it's hard to get that data because it's, the CRMs are kind of customized and flexible. And so if you don't enter things in correctly, you get bad. So like dialing in your data, understanding the KPIs, understanding the drivers of the people, and then figuring out to not use it as like a form of punishment, but like using it as a scorecard, using it as like, I used to collect cards when I was, sports cards when I was a kid. And I just love the stats in the back of it. And I would love, like, whether it was like baseball, I'd be watching, okay, this person's getting, his batting average is increasing year over year. He's getting more home runs, like, then I was like, okay, this guy's going down. I need to trade him for this, but understanding how to use that data and then not use it as like a weapon, but use it as a tool to like help your people who ideally are very strong, good people that you've approved to be on your team, help them, maximize their individual contributions performance. That's a huge one. And I think too many organizations like stop there. That's what stops them from evolving.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's very, very tough to run a successful company if you don't have the data, right? Like, I mean, the feelings aren't enough at some point, especially when you're dealing with massive amounts of movements in cash flow, because you can literally grow your company right out of business, and that is the single biggest thing that I get to work with some of the young entrepreneurs I work with and some of my mentor work is I say, you should be just as scared of growth as you are of the opposite, because growth can drive you out of business as fast as the other. And until you go through it, you don't fully understand it. But unless you know what your cash is and know what your receivables are, and you know what the cash turn is, like it can be a scary thing. So even in success, it can end up being a bad thing without actually knowing what your numbers are.
And here's the worst thing in our space that I see is that I think due to social media, I'm sure it was always there to some extent before social media was prevalent, but now you have all of these information sources, some of which are great information sources, some of which are terrible information sources. You have all of these new age gurus that have popped up and are trying to, say they have all the answers and they're the new way of doing things. And it's to find the right sources of information is critical. And there's a lot of wrong sources of information out there. And so, you have to have that ability to kind of see through BS now as well, because, you see, the crazy claims and the crazy stories and the chaotic stuff. Generally speaking, if you're getting advice that seems kind of boring, mundane, not necessarily what you want to hear, there's no tips and tricks and easy, ways to make millions of dollars. It's like, okay, well, let's analyze your business and you've got the wrong compensation plan. You got like, those are the real ways to elevate and scale a long-term successful business. Not like, hey, you come to my class, spend thousands of dollars and teach your people how to say these words. It's like, that's not the key.
Yeah. Well, that's, we've definitely found that when we go to the really good, respected trade shows in this industry, and you see the same success groups there over and over because they actually do produce results, and they have, and the people in them have great reputations. You're like, yep, those are the people you want to align yourself with for sure.
And many times it's not something new, right? I mean, at any given time, 75, 80% of what's worked for the last 2 decades is still going to work, right? Doesn't mean 100% of it is applicable, but the majority of it is. Like, very, very rarely would something change overnight that would be a huge part of the business. Now, maybe with AI and some things, there's going to be some of that wholesale change, but still, at a minimum, it's going to use all of the same psychology and all of the same concepts that were working for decades. It's just a new way of accomplishing those.
Yeah. I mean, I think back so when I first got into it, the primary form of advertising back then was the yellow pages, which to me, like, you might even have some audience members looking at this and don't even know what the hell that is. But, it was like our kind of, I don't want to say gimmick because they were really effective for the most part, but ours was like, instead of just the pictures of the trucks and, spending all this money, like, let's put some word heavy ads that have it's like an advertorial and make it look different. And that was like the big marketing push back then. And this was before the age of Google and search engines and Google My Business, all that. But that's one thing that quickly shifted over, that's probably a 2.5, 3 year period where, if you were an early adapter, you started kicking ass and you were really had the first mover advantage. And if you hung on to what worked forever before, and now nobody is looking at the yellow pages, and now it's expensive and you're not getting any results, you got hurt.
Who Moved My Cheese is a good book about that. I don't know if you'll ever see that, but it's a really good book.
Hey, Landon, I'm going to transition a little bit here and talk about a few things that people don't want to necessarily focus on. Everyone wants to talk about the good, right? Everyone celebrates the good. But in reality, so many people fail, and not even fail. It's hard, right? It's legitimately hard to start and grow a business. And so I just want to ask you, actually, and Josh as well, both of you, like, tell me about the times where you guys had those thoughts. You woke up in the middle of the night and you said, this might not work, right? This might not work. And what do you do? Like, what did you personally do, or what was the situation? What did you have to do to get past it? Either it was, a momentary point in time and the business recovered, or it was you personally from just a stress issue, like, because that's a real thing, right?
Yeah. Well, from an overall perspective, I don't really think that I have a gene that thinks that way. From an idea perspective or strategy perspective, I can pivot, but overall, this isn't going to work. It's like, you wake up and, I guess why the divorce rate's so high, right? Like if I wanted to be divorced, I get divorced. But if my mindset is it might be freaking terrible right now, I'm going to figure out a different strategy, right? So it's the same thing with business. It's like, okay, well, this is going wrong. This is going wrong. This is going wrong. I'm clearly doing something wrong. I need to get better people. I need to get better information. I need to pivot how I'm going to market. I need to, maybe plumbing isn't the right entry point. Maybe it's HVAC. Maybe it's electrical. Maybe we need to start on focus on sales instead of service, or vice versa. Or maybe sales isn't working right now. The economy shifted, so now we got to go back to a shift on service. That's a constant thing, right? Even in successful businesses. But if you have the gene of like, well, maybe this isn't going to work. Like, yeah, if you're burning cash and you're doing terrible shit, stop doing it and figure out a better way and reach out. I mean, that's the best thing about where we're at now. Like, there are so many people to reach out to and talk to and connect with that can help, and genuinely, that's what I love about our industry. People just genuinely want to see other people successful, and they're willing to help. So there's resources out there for that.
Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like to get connected, you can find me at chadmpeterman.com. To see what our team's up to, you can visit petermanbros.com. As always, keep growing out there.